Hi, beautiful people. Welcome to the channel. My name is Sasha, and on our channel, we discuss true crime and we do our makeup here at the same time. If you need a moment to grab a snack, go grab one, and I'll meet you back here. All right, so now that you're back, today's story takes place in East Chester, Nova Scotia. We are going to be discussing the Ideal Maternity Home, which was operated through the years of late 1920s until 1947. This establishment was run by William and Lila Young, and with their establishment, they offered birthing plans and adoptions for children of unwed mothers. Just a quick forewarning, we will be discussing child abuse, child deaths. So if that's something you're not really interested in or want to hear, I would suggest just skip ahead. So yeah, you're gonna want to hold your tits for this one. So for today's story, we're just gonna call them William and Lila. Married couple from Nova Scotia. They married at kind of a young age, I guess. I mean, depending on who's asking. They got married. Both of them kind of have a medical background, but the two of them in the late 1920s decided to open up this establishment to help unwed mothers. And also, I will leave all the information below on all the products that I will be using. So, as you already know, makeup is pretty messy, and there's going to be times that I'm going to look crazy. So, you know, it is what it is. We're here to just relax, do the things we love, talk about true crime, and really just look good. Self-care, right? We're doing some mental care and self-care. So with William and Lila, from what I could understand from the articles that I read, because there were quite a few, but they were kind of all over the place. They had, I believe, a 4-bedroom. Had started off with a 4-bedroom. And then over the years, they had gotten, I believe it was like, I want to say like 20 bedrooms. And so what they offered was room and board for unwed mothers who were expecting and delivering. And they had a pretty interesting kind of fee process, especially for adoption. So what they offered for their delivery fee, so their delivery fee was $25, and then several dollars, it didn't give me an exact dollar amount, but just several dollars per day for room and board. And then for the mothers who wanted to basically leave their children behind and have them adopted, they would have to pay an extra $300 to basically leave their child behind to be adopted. But when they were wanting to do that, they were wanting to adopt their children out to somebody else, they had to sign a contract with William and Lila. And in that contract, absolutely ridiculous. So in their contract, the child not only had to be white, but the child could not be crippled, could not have a birthmark, and could not be deformed or have any kind of special needs or disabilities. So automatically, that was a no for them. Would they take them? Yes. But we'll get into what they did with the deformed and crippled and birthmarked children later on. But as for the contract of adoption, the mother would have to pay Mr. and Mrs. Young to keep the child. And then from there, Mr. and Mrs. Young would find a suitable family. Oftentimes, a lot of business came from New York and New Jersey at the time. So families would see Mr. and Mrs. Young, their article in the newspaper saying that they had beautiful babies up for adoption, and literally advertised in the paper, and I quote, "charming babies for adoption, free of social disease." I'm not sure what to think about that. I don't know. Free of social disease. I mean, really. So with that being said, we had fairly wealthy couples who couldn't have children for whatever reason, come from basically New Jersey and New York, and they would come to Mr. and Mrs. Young's home, and they would pick out their ideal baby. And because Mr. and Mrs. Young had made so much money, and we're really just trying to keep that underwater, keep that under wraps, they would have these couples basically donate to the home rather than it being down in the books as like adoption. So that kind of, their money is kept a secret. Anyhow, let me fix my face here because it looks a little white on camera, I know, but I always start my makeup off with sunscreen, and it is my absolute favorite go-to. I can always count. It's by Color Science, and it is the color Flex. And it also has SPF 50. And I am not kidding you. This is my absolutely favorite thing on the planet. I mean, if there was one cream, I love Moisturizer by Ordinary and my sunscreen by Ordinary, or no, not Ordinary, Color Science. I'm sorry, can't speak today. So anyhow, adoption fees were $10,000, and oftentimes they would have the couples, who were adopting, make it out to the house so that it didn't look suspicious to any kind of government officials asking questions about all this money. We'll get into that too, because we're going to talk about CPS getting involved, officials getting involved. It's very messy. So this couple not only advertised in the paper exactly what they were doing, but they were also tricksters. So what women would do who were unwed and couldn't go home because their family kicked them out, their fathers, their mothers abandoned them, completely disowned them. And so what they would do is they would come to Mr. and Mrs. Young's home to deliver their child, kind of recuperate and figure out like what it is that they're going to do. And of course, while they're there, they're completely getting brainwashed by the couple because they're pushing the fact that society does not accept unwed mothers, right? So the others, of course, are thinking, okay, yeah, this is going to end my life. Like my life is over. Don't know what I'm going to do. So of course they end up leaving their child behind with Mr. and Mrs. Young, and for them to adopt their children out. However, oftentimes what Mr. and Mrs. Young would do, they would deliver a baby, a healthy, very healthy baby. And then when the mother had gone to bed and she woke up the very next morning, they would actually tell her that their child died. Yes, you heard me correctly. They would completely lie to the mother and say that their child died overnight, out random cause. They don't know why, what happened. And oftentimes the mother didn't want to see the child because they just were afraid to get traumatized. Or there were times that Mr. and Mrs. Young would actually tell the mother that it's best to not see the child because the child just wasn't appropriate for viewing. They would say that the child looked absolutely terrifyingly scary and gross, or just unrecognizable for whatever reason. And these mothers would believe it. So they would pack up, they would leave, right? They would be extremely upset with the death of their child. Some would move on pretty quickly, and we'll get into that too. And meanwhile, so the mother leaves thinking that, like, you know, her child died, right? But in reality, they just moved the child to a different part of the house, and the child is completely alive and well. And so what Mr. and Mrs. Young did here is they already had a family on the list from one of those places in New York or Scotia, or not Scotia, New York or New Jersey. They already had them coming there. They already had a meeting set up with the new family that's going to adopt that child. Meanwhile, the child is alive and well in the house, but the mother thinks that the child is dead. Like, that's a whole nother level of messed up. So this family would come, they would pay them that fee of $10,000, and they would pay it to the house as a donation, right? And then they would adopt the child, take it home, and do whatever. Do whatever that most people do with adopted children. Oftentimes, though, they were also not treated very well. They were not loved. They were not cared for. Some were, but a majority were not. Now, next thing we're going to get into were the unadopted children, or shall I say unmarketable is what they used. Literally, they called the children who could not get adopted out unmarketable. So what they did with those children. Now, mind you, children are blessings from God. But their idea of unmarketable, like their standards for unmarketable, are completely disgusting. So they talk about if you have a deformity, right? If you have color, so you had to be white. So anything of color, any kind of deformity, any kind of birthmark also. They considered a birthmark of all things to be a deformity. So like if you had just the cutest little birthmark on your hip or on your leg, you were automatically considered deformed and unsellable. So what's going to happen next? So this is where it gets freaking deep. So the children that they could not market and sell in their paper, the newspaper where they would advertise the beautiful children that they had for sale, they would eventually starve. They would not feed those children. In fact, they would give those children molasses and water. And that is all those children had to survive on. Molasses and water. And eventually they died. They died from that. Yeah, so they would feed the unmarketable children molasses and water to survive on, which really is no substance at all. So they died. They basically got neglected to death just because the Youngs couldn't make any money from selling them. Which is absolutely disgusting. And so what they would do, right, is back then they had these types of grocery boxes which carried butter. Hence the reason why the story was called the Butterbox, because literally the children were buried in these Butterboxes that were 22-inch pine boxes that the children were buried into. And there were graves dug all throughout the property of the Youngs. I think it was like up to, 12 miles of graves that they had placed these dead children in. And it's said to have been about 800 children who had died of the same fate from the Youngs, being given molasses and water. And that's it. Eventually, rumors started circulating around this town, and people were hearing that children were dying and getting neglected and being starved to death by being given molasses and water. So CPS, the same CPS that we have today, we had back then. The only difference is we didn't have very many laws on neglect and child abuse back then. So really there was nothing stopping this family from what they were doing. But CPS would come and they would investigate them. And at the end of the day, even though they didn't like that family legally wasn't in the wrong of anything. So they were able to just continue doing what they were doing with no consequence. And it was absolutely disgusting. Now, mind you, laws back then, literally, like, you would get away with murder. That's literally what happened with this family. They were getting away with murder. Like I said, up to 800 children were reported to have died in their hands. 800. Let that sink in for a second. Could you imagine? Oh, this baby isn't worth $10,000 to me or to anybody else. So you know what? I'm just going to feed them nothing because they're not going to bring me anything, so I'm not going to bring them anything. Like, how disgusting. Really, how disgusting. Like, not only does this child have a very hard life because society as a whole decided that unwed mothers, nope, terrible. Absolutely, even if it wasn't her choice. But then, this poor child who is just waiting to be born and loved on, right, gets left behind or stolen from his mother just to be decided that, like, are you pretty enough? Are you perfect enough? Or are you not? Like, this balance of, like, the fate of this child's life is literally based on his looks and appearance right off the bat. You have to be white and you have to be perfect. If not, you get the boot. You get molasses and water. Like, these people are sick. So anyhow, with CPS getting involved, there was a few times where CPS would do a random stop by and they would tell them, what they needed to update, especially they needed nurses. Since they were going to have this type of establishment with children in the building, needing care and whatnot, they had said that they needed to have nurses as their staff. So what they would do when CPS would arrive on short notice, without notifying them or anything, if they had a mother in the building who had just delivered, they would literally have her dress the part of a nurse and pretend to be the nurse. They would have a newly mother pretend to be a nurse just so that Mr. and Mrs. Young would not have a problem in the building. Absolutely. So yeah, this family did some pretty despicable things for 2 decades. And honestly, I mean, we could argue, were they caught or were they not caught? Because 2 decades is a long time, especially because back then they did not have any laws against child abuse. So I feel like they got away with a lot. A lot. Too much, actually. Let me see. So yeah, another thing I also want to mention, as far as the money aspect, so for the house, like the donations, right? Because we talked about how they would have the families donate to the house so that their money, like, wasn't looked into, like, in the books. Does that make sense? So as far as to the house goes, just the house's donations, they got about like $60,000, which back then was a lot. And that's not including the sales of the children. That's not including the sales. That's just donations. So doing our math here, they were pretty rich. They made about, according to, they made about $3.5 million in sales from the babies. So they were pretty well off. So they could have afforded to keep those 800 children alive. They could have afforded to do that. But they didn't, because they were fucking greedy and evil. So yeah, with all the money that they made, really it just went into the house's appearance, them having nice fancy things, and really just being all posh. That's really all they did with the money. They never did anything as far as for the children. If the children had any kind of medical problems or they were sick, they were sick. They weren't going to invest in any care, even though they were technically doctors, right? They had that medical profession under their belt that they could help the children, right? Or they had enough money where they could go seek help for the children. But no, they never ever used a penny of their money to help the child. If the child was sick, well, best of luck. That's all they did. And that is absolutely freaking ridiculous. So, child basically had to fend for himself or herself, and was basically screwed. Like, absolutely screwed. Like, these people showed no remorse. Like, all they saw these babies as was money. Money. They didn't see them as a living human that's freaking adorable, you know, the greatest gift on the planet. They didn't see it that way. They thought, this is a ticket. A ticket to the good life. And if this child doesn't bring us any money, then bye. Man, I'm telling you, this case brought a whole new attitude out of me. This case. Not only that, but Mr. and Mrs. Young, I mean, they went above and beyond for their clientele. Above and beyond. Like, you wouldn't believe half of the things they did to get a customer. They would literally do anything for their customer and to keep their customer coming back. Like, as long as they were making cash, you could do anything and everything to those children. And they did not care. No, sir. They did not care. And that's disgusting. Like, who has the best interests for the child in mind? I just want to know. Nobody did. Nobody did. They just cared that they got paid. Even eventually down the road when they did get some nurses on board, those nurses did the same thing. The same thing. They had no remorse and no sympathy for the children when they were being mistreated the entire time. Like, that baffles me. That really baffles me. And mind you, the children who were getting severely neglected just because they were deformed or had something wrong with them, they weren't living in the greatest conditions either while they were being starved to death. Like, they literally were living in squalor until they died. Like, that was absolutely disgusting. So many years later, eventually, a lady by the name of Violet, 75 years later, had gone back because she wanted to know what happened to her daughter. Her daughter's name was Faith, which she named after some ladies that she had met in the maternity home. And Faith's fate, the irony here, was when she was born, the mother had gone to sleep, and when she had woken up, the Youngs had told her that the child had passed, and was not viewable. Mind you, Violet was married. She wasn't an unwed single mother. She was just there because she was literally delivering this child and she couldn't wait. But this family, the Youngs here, they, in the middle of the night, snatched this child to sell it to somebody. And then told Violet in the morning that the child had died from unnatural causes. So she believed them. She went back home. She told her husband and her family about it. Of course, her husband and her father both were adamant, like they wanted to see the baby. And then Violet's mother was just saying, you know, like, let the child be. We don't want to disturb it. You know, just, she's in heaven now. Let her be. But Violet's father and husband were determined. They absolutely wanted to see the body because they just couldn't believe it. Plus, they wanted to be at peace with themselves, and they wanted to at least meet the child. But over time, they kind of just, they forgot about it. They let it go. And just to find out, you know, almost 75 years later, when she had gone back to that place because she had heard about the rumors with Mr. and Mrs. Young selling children, killing children, she went back and she dug up the grave, right? The grave that was supposedly for her daughter Faith. They dug it up and they found a body in there, but it wasn't of the body of her daughter. It was of somebody else. So in that moment, she realized, like, shoot, my daughter's out there. Like, they lied to me. My daughter's out there. And as a mom, you know, it's something that's difficult to explain, but mothers have an intuition like no other. We know when something's wrong. We just sense it. And she sensed that she was wrong. All those years, she was wrong. She always had that feeling that her daughter was still alive, but she couldn't bear, you know, the thought of like digging into it. She really just wanted to just not move past it and leave her behind. But during those times, it was incredibly hard. I mean, it was already hard just having two people in the home, not alone having children. I mean, it was expensive. Time was tough. And so she really just, she tried to just keep it pushing, right? She tried to think, okay, you know what? My daughter had passed away. That's it. I'm just going to focus on the here, the now, and what God has in store for me. But she didn't realize that 75 years later, her gut telling her that no, something's wrong, your daughter's not dead. She was just so heartbroken that she did not listen to her gut instinct the first time, and now had waited too long to find out that what her gut was telling her was in fact true. I'm going to do my eyeliner off camera real quick, and I'll come right back. All right, so we're back. Did the liner. So the Youngs here, they committed a lot of crimes. A lot of crimes. Ultimately, the one thing that I'm going to say, and it's really sad that it's true, is they got away with it. I really wished that they didn't. I wish that, you know, they got caught for their crimes. They never got caught. Eventually, they packed up and did other things. But as far as what they did, they got away with it. As for Violet, she never got closure for her daughter or finding out where she is. Unfortunately, that was the same fate for a lot of other parents and children, especially a lot of children from Nova Scotia, when they had found out and grown up and found out about this story and knew that they were adopted, they pieced it together, and they realized, you know, where they came from and the dark truth about their adoption process. And so a lot of them created a group and came together to try to get more information on, you know, them, the history and what happened and whatnot. And just so that they can have closure. A lot of them have tried to locate their biological mothers. Some, not very much luck. Others, they've had the encounter of meeting them, or others would return letters to them saying that they did not ever want to meet. It's just really sad. Really sad. Hang on a second. I need to focus here. I'm going to clean it up here too. So yeah, a lot of them, you know, their mothers were just too ashamed to meet them or even just continue contact with them. Does this look okay? Yeah, it looks way too dark. Let me fix that. I think it's the lighting. Their mothers were way too ashamed to come forward and meet them and, you know, just see like how their life ended up, or to even give them closure. Like, it was really sad. It was really, really sad. Let's see here. Go with this one. So, yeah, a lot of mothers were just too ashamed to want to get to meet their, you know, their child that they left for adoption. It's really sad. But a lot of them came together and joined this group, and they actually meet up And they try to, you know, learn more about what happened, kind of get some closure together. And there's still a lot to be discovered, because like I said, there is way more to the story than what was, you know, originally said in the article. Far more. But you know, like, obviously the Youngs are not around to tell their side of the story, and personally, even if they were, we wouldn't care what they had to say because we wouldn't believe them. So what we have is basically from the survivors, and a little bit was from just witnesses from back then, who remembered or had seen what was happening. Oftentimes, women who wanted to adopt the children would have a doctor's appointment and like discuss the child that they were wanting to adopt, and they would tell them, kind of like, you know, a therapist, they would tell them like what the house is like, the situation, if that environment is going to, you know, match her own environment and her house, like if she were to adopt. And oftentimes the doctor would be like, you need to get that child out of that house now. Like, you need to adopt them and take them away from the Youngs, because what they are doing is terrible. They're literally abusing the child. So, I mean, some people knew what was going on, and some people turned away and acted like they didn't see it, which is sick. Absolutely sick that people would do that. So now fast forward to the future. None of the bodies were ever identified, because there was really no way, even with today's technology, the DNA is just way too deteriorated to do anything with. So there's no way for them to like find out. Since none of the graves were written, like who it belonged to or anything, they really don't know. They don't know. So what they ended up doing, they put their money together and they made one very large headstone, and they dedicated the headstone to the 800 dead children, which is really sad. And you know, every year they get together and they come visit the gravestone, and they think about, you know, what their life could have been if they could have ended up in that box. If, you know, they were born deformed by chance, you know, were they going to be the victim of that? And luckily, they survived. So more or less, you know, they realized that even though the Youngs were extremely awful and evil, they were fortunate enough to survive. That's just really, really sad. Like we think about that and put it in that perspective. Like, they were born enough to survive, where they could have been unlucky and, you know, been, God knows, born with a birthmark. just one small birthmark was going to change their fate and end up being starved to death. Which just shows, like, in society, we've come a long way with laws and child protective laws. But we still today have a struggle with lots of children in foster care and going through adoption, having a tough time. Whether we like to believe it or not, there's still bad in this world. And a lot of children behind the scenes get treated badly. There's a lot that gets slipped through the cracks. And those that get unnoticed. And I think, kind of like back then and now, had people spoken up and done something about it to stop it, we could have maybe made a change. I can't say definitely, but I can definitely say you never know until you try. And it's just really sad that all those children and their lives had to be affected because of this family who just woke up one day and decided, we're going to make money. We don't care how we're going to make it. We're going to make it. So yeah. This family, sorry. Sometimes I lose my words here and it just is what it is. But the fact that this family profited on death and life, but also death, is just sickening. Like, I really want to know, like, how could they do that? Like, how do you sleep at night? Like, oh crap, I got mascara on my eyeshadow. Now I have to fix that. Freaking A. Don't worry. We got this, and I got it at the bottom. Don't you hate when you get mascara on your eyeshadow? Oh god. It's okay. We're gonna fix this. We're gonna fix this. I know that once it dries, it fades right off, but I'm impatient. Okay. So, profiting on children, absolutely terrible. Let me know what you guys think, because honestly, like I said, when I was reading this story, I was thinking to myself, how did this family sleep at night? Especially Lila. Like, I don't know about men, but just speaking for myself as a woman, like Lila, where was your head? What were you thinking? Right? I thought women were supposed to be like naturally nurturing, right? Granted, not a lot of us were born with the gift. Clearly, Lila, I don't know, I guess she was more concerned about everything other than children. She wanted a job with children, but couldn't help children. Like, the nerve. Hang on a second. Like, she loved children enough for this to be her career field, right? Her career field. But also could not be bothered by children. Does that make sense? Likes children enough for it to be her career field, but also doesn't want to do it. Like, it's one of those things where it's like, Make it make sense, man. Make it make sense. Make it make sense, dude. Wow. Lila. How's it going, girl? I swear, I don't know what's wrong with people. Like, I really wanted what the whole point of the even sugar, molasses, and water. Like, what the heck, man? Like, how could you give that to them and look them in the face when treating them that way and not even feel sad? Like, how can you do that? How can you do something so awful and not feel bad about it? Like, here you go, little one. Here is your bottle of nothing for the day. Like, people are messed up. Honestly, I'm really glad that nowadays people have like background checks and all sorts of checks that they have to do before they can have a child. Because honestly, back then there were no standards. There was no checklist. There was no checklist for being an adopted parent. Like, you could literally be anybody. As long as you had the money to pay, you could do it. They didn't ask you, like, what your plans were, what your lifestyle was. They didn't care. You just told them what kind of child you wanted, and they would get it for you. They didn't care if you were single or married or had children or were a killer. They didn't care. They really didn't care. As long as you had the money, they made time. Like, that's just sick, dude. Sick. And you know what? Back then, so many children got abused. It was normal. So many children got abused. And nobody helped protect them. That's really sad. I think I'm going to do a little more color here. What color lip should we do with this? I don't know. Not sure if we should do a colored lip or a nude lip. I don't know. I think we should do this one. So, yeah. What are your guys' thoughts? I'm like trying to chalk and put liner at the same time. It doesn't work. Never works. But seriously, like, what are your guys' thoughts? Like, what do you think goes through a person's head to practically murder a child? And, like, goes about their day, eating, sleeping, going grocery shopping, like running your typical errands. Meanwhile, you have like 10 or 15 children at your house right now starving to death. And like one of them, before you get home or as you're opening the door, has probably just died. And you just like walk by it like no big deal. Like, okay, we're going to get rid of this one too. This one's too. All right, let's get the Butterbox. Like, you have got to be another freaking level of sick for that not to bother you. Like, I'm sorry. No amount of money could ever make me look in the wrong direction. And the nurses back then, they too didn't say anything. That also freaking bothered me. Like, you have to take an oath to take care of people. And meanwhile, like, I'll insert the pictures, but like, they would take photos with the children that needed to be sold, right? Take pictures with the healthy and sellable babies. Meanwhile, they knew that the sick and dying were just clear across the house, and they did nothing. Nothing. Like, that's another level of sick. I think that looks okay. So, crazy. I know, crazy hair. Anyhow, this hair, goodness gracious. Goodness gracious. So here is the after look, the aftermath, I guess you should say. The aftermath. Don't mind my hair today, guys. My hair, I don't know about you, but not having the greatest hair day. But, I don't know why my face looks so pale in this screen, but it's not, I promise you. But it makes me look like I am. I don't know why. I really don't know why. I promise you, I am way darker than that. Hold on a second. All right. Trying to warm this look up a little bit. That awkward silence. Sorry, guys. So, anyways, like I was saying, the story was pretty dark, in my opinion. Like there was no aftercare for these moms. There was really just no emotional support. Honestly, they were just preyed on. because they automatically looked helpless, and because they knew that society as a whole doesn't, you know, protect unwed mothers, they took advantage of that. And, like, stole babies and then sold them. And then if they weren't that great, then they would slowly kill them. Yeah. So that's all I got for you guys today. Let me know in the comments section if there is any other stories you'd like me to touch on. If you like this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye.